people with 6 years, 7 years work experience.
Yeah.
And these people, for them, the opportunity cost is higher because they're leaving a job, sometimes family, and they're going into university. So for them to get that scholarship becomes so critical that even they're willing to apply to target colleges and all just to get that presidential scholarship and all of that. The pool in the last 2 years has been tremendously competitive, for younger grads, especially for fresh graduates and young professionals. So it's been quite hard getting scholarships the last couple of years. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and now share my screen, and then we can start. Have we started the webinar, team?
Yes.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this beautiful Saturday afternoon. My name is Tripti Singh. I'm from the Red Pen. And today we're doing an exceptionally intellectually engaging panel of students who studied STEM. And as you can see, they're all women. So therefore, the theme of our panel today is Women in STEM. And I'm going to give it another 1 minute, maybe a minute and a half, wait for some other people to log in as well. We can see that the crowd is just filling in. So we'll give it another minute and a half, and then we will definitely start our webinar. But this is a great time. Go grab your cup of coffee or a Diet Coke or whatever you feel like drinking today afternoon. And then you can sit and join us for a fantastic discussion about women in STEM. All right, we do have our 4 panelists here, and 4 of them extremely excited with their admits, working on their visas currently, getting ready to pack their bags and leave for their graduate school. So it's going to be a great session about insights from them, also about their educational journey. It's going to be a great session. I do encourage everybody to put in their questions in the Q&A box. Go ahead and leave any question that you may have for the panelists in the Q&A box. And when we come to the Q&A section of the panel, then we'll definitely take your questions. I'm going to spend the next 30 seconds just talking while everybody else is also still logging in about the Red Pen. The Red Pen is an educational counseling firm, and it is our belief and it is our mission to give prospective applicants the most unbiased, objective, and the most updated information about what it means to get a degree abroad, whether it's undergraduate or a boarding school or an MBA, or in my case, when I work exclusively with master's and PhD applicants. We are trying to get you guys the most updated information, and our Journey to College event is an extension of that. Here is an opportunity for the next 1 hour to listen from fresh applicants. Each one of them, and I'm going to introduce them momentarily, have just finished their application. They're working on their visas, about to head out for the fall 2022 intake. And they're going to share with you, of course, a lot of knowledge about their own understanding of what it means to be a woman in STEM, which is the first part of our discussion. And the next part of our discussion is going to be about elements of their application that really stood out for them and what advice they want to share with our attendees today. So on that note, right, I have done some research into this topic for the last couple of years, and currently the way I see it, the gender gap in many of the STEM fields across the globe is an apparent and seemingly stagnant problem. For us, especially from the Indian subcontinent, the gap seems to be a direct result of not considering some of the STEM areas where women actually have a predominant presence as a STEM area. Right. And so there is definitely one effect of saying that, okay, STEM predominantly seems to be a male dominated area when we think of engineering, or we think of pilot, or we think of, other mathematics and finance. But then there are areas where women are predominant, like allied health sciences, or the study of cognition, or the study of neuropsychology, which are STEM courses. But then we do not consider them, in our subcontinent as being a part of the STEM group of subject study. So, and of course, our upbringing has led to these implicit biases. And this implicit bias, when combined with the conditioning that, the STEM is predominantly a male-dominated area, and that women who are studying quant or allied medicine or allied health are not inherently, STEM focused, this causes the dichotomy, this causes that problem, the stagnation where we are not able to address this gender gap. So which is why we have a STEM focused panel today. There are women here who've joined me today who may have a STEM undergraduate background or may not have a STEM undergraduate background, who may be going to study STEM now or may not be going to study STEM now. So there is a combination of both that you're going to speak to today and you're going to hear from today. And on this note, I'd like to introduce the panelists to you. So, but what I want you to know is that the focus of this panel specifically today, is that the virtue, that the passion and the commitment that women can show towards the study of a quant or a physiological field of study or a scientific field of study is no less than a male, right? But for us to constantly have to be made to feel that because of our implicit biases, that actually the STEM area is a male-dominated field and that's not where women are going to excel. Well, I'm hoping to debunk that myth for all of our attendees today. I'd like to, on this note, bring out my panelists. Ananya, I would love for you to introduce yourself. We have with us Ananya Ganesh today. Ananya, I'd like you to introduce yourself first, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ananya Ganesh. I did my bachelor's in computer science. And I'm a fresh graduate and I'm now going for my master's of engineering in computer science at Cornell Tech.
Thank you, Ananya, and welcome. Satvika, how about you? Let's go with you next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Satvika. I just finished my undergraduate degree in psychology from Kriya University in Chennai, and I will be pursuing my master's in research in developmental neuroscience and psychopathology. And it's a 2-year program. The first year is at UCL in London, and the second year will be at Yale in New Haven. So that's my...
Thank you, Satvika. Ria, hello. I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Ria, and I did my undergrad in biotechnology from VIT Vellore. And I'm now going to pursue a master's in public health with a specialization in maternal and child health. And this is at George Washington University in DC.
Excellent. Thank you, Ria. Hi, Tripti. Can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Tripti, and I did my BSc in Economics, Maths, and Statistics from Christ University in Bangalore. And I'm going for my master's in Quantitative Economics at UCLA, which is in Los Angeles.
Thank you. Thank you, Tripti. And welcome each one of you. And thank you for agreeing to be a part of this panel discussion. Our discussion today is going to, like I just mentioned in my introduction, is going to be about our experiences of being a woman and studying STEM, or now going from a non-STEM background into a STEM-focused area of study. And, we are going to, of course, talk about your journey into your dream college as well. So I'm going to start off this session with an icebreaker, and this is for all 4 of you. And, Ananya, why don't you take the lead on this? Ratio of girls to boys in your class. Ananya, what was the ratio of girls to boys in your class, in your undergraduate class?
So when I still remember this day walking in to my first ever class of engineering, and there were 5 girls in my class and there were around 50 to 55 boys in my class. Wow. And that's when it really hit me that the stereotype is real, and it was a big shock for me when I first realized that, okay, wow, there are just 5 girls in my class.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Tripti, how about you? What was the ratio of boys to girls in your class?
Hi, so my case was a bit different. We actually had more girls in my class than boys. So I think it was 60-40, like 60% girls and 40% boys, or it would have been 50-50.
Okay, got it. And how about you, Satvika?
So for me, studying psychology, I think my class had around 30 students in total. And I would say around 20 of them or 18 of them were women, and the rest 10 were boys. So it was a girl-dominated discipline in my college.
Got it. And Ria, how about you?
I think same for me, because it was biotech that I did. I think the ratio would have been 65 to 70% girls and about 30 to 35% boys. So that was my experience in undergrad.
Okay. Now that's super interesting for me because, with Satvika and Tripti, their entire undergraduate focus was social sciences, economics, and psychology. And even though Tripti, you had mathematics and statistics, right? Studying BSc economics is considered regular for a girl, right? But I would imagine that biotech RIA would have a mix of boys and girls. Were the other specializations more male dominated in college at VIT, RIA?
So something like a computer science would be about 60-40 or 50-50 almost, because there were a lot of girls in computer science, but something like a mechanical or a civil, it would be very, very poor. Yeah. So I think even IT and electrical engineering, it's about 60-40, I would say, or 50-50 in some cases. But when it came to mechanical and more core subjects like civil and things like that, the ratio was completely skewed. So it was much more guys as compared to girls. So
Got it. And Satvika and Tripti, this question is for you. We've been talking about doing a woman in STEM panel for a month now, but before that, before I got in touch with you guys, have you ever thought of yourself as women in STEM? Satvika?
So my undergraduate degree is a BSc in psychology, but it is very difficult for people around me, be it extended family or people who I talk to about my my major, to understand that it was in fact a STEM degree. And there's the sense of surprise and even happiness from extended family when I tell them that it's a BSc degree and not a BA degree. And they say, oh, it's a BSc degree. That's good. That's great. So there is this sort of one, that sciences are valued higher, and two, that my major isn't really seen as a science. It's not perceived as a science by the general public. And when it is seen as a science, or when I tell them that it's being awarded as a science degree, that causes them to actually see it with a little bit more respect, or at least see it with surprise. So there's that dichotomy. But additionally, I think I had to consciously keep telling myself that, there are different ways to approach even psychology as a discipline. It is both an art and a science. And the way that my program sort of focused on it was through a scientific lens. We had extensive modules on research, be it qualitative or quantitative, on experimental research design, on statistics, on working with data, analyzing data, on even coding and things like that. So it was viewed from a very scientific lens. But while I understood that, I would say that it was more difficult for me to try and explain. There would always be this question of, oh, but psychology, how is it a science? And then to sit and explain that over and over again was a bit of a tedious process, and highlights the perception of this discipline.
Got it. Tripti, how about you? What was your experience? Because there's economics, which is so regular for a girl to do economics, whether it's BA or BSc, but then you also have mathematics and statistics in your curriculum. First of all, it's fantastic that these opportunities are now available in India. Like a decade ago, there was no BSc in math, stats, and eco. It was just BA eco. So I'm kind of glad that this is happening. But yeah, take us through a little bit about your experiences and whether you saw yourself as a girl in STEM.
So initially, I didn't look at myself as a girl in STEM because I actually come from a commerce background. So in 11th and 12th, I took commerce with math. And I also personally did not know there was a BSc degree with eco that was available. So when I came across it, I was equally surprised and really glad that this kind of an opportunity was available. But kind of similar to Satvika, every time I told someone I was doing eco, maths, and stats, the first thing that just only the economics part of it stuck with them. So nobody ever looked at it as a BSc degree, because a BA economics honors is more common. So they would always be like, oh, so it's an economic honors. So I would have to explain that. But I think I started looking at myself as a woman in STEM probably from my second or third year in college. Because I realized that the degree gave equal importance to maths and statistics. And similar to Satvika, I knew what I was doing was part of STEM, but some people viewed it as a STEM course, some people didn't. And I started looking at myself as a woman in STEM only later. For the longest time, I didn't, only because of my commerce background.
Right. And I think that's where it happens, right in high school. We we are being conditioned to think of ourselves as aligning to a scientific thought process or not, simply by saying, well, 11, 12, you took commerce, you clearly are not a scientific bent of mind, right? That kind of a thing. Ria, for you, it's even more interesting because you've gone from biotech, and then tell us a little bit about your work experience, because that's where I want to know about the male representation within your workspace. Tell us a little bit about your workspace first.
So for me, as opposed to Satvika and Tripti, I think because the name by itself was biotechnology and it was in an engineering college, I kind of accepted, like, maybe in my first or second year, because I did have a lot of common engineering subjects like math and coding and things like that, that I was a woman in STEM. So for me, that was not a barrier initially or anything. So after biotechnology, after 4 years of biotechnology, I did my last semester capstone project, that it's called, at a hospital. So I've always wanted to work with doctors. I've always liked medicine and that aspect of it. So I knew I wanted to do something in that field. So I did my 6 months capstone project at Nauroji Wadia Maternity Hospital in Mumbai. And I was at their IVF lab over there. So I was in the laboratory part, helping making babies, if I put it in a very simple way. But yeah, and then after, I think, my 6 months of capstone project over there, they offered me a job for another 6 months, which I took up immediately, because I didn't want to let go of that government hospital work experience that is unmatched in terms of exposure. So I would say, because it was such a grounding setting, I would, in terms of the kind of patients that come to the hospital, the kind of workload they get, the kind of the different kind of cases that come, it was unbelievable, the exposure, because you have more than like 100 patients visiting the clinic a day. So you can imagine the variety in cases. You can imagine how well the doctors are, how efficient the doctors are in terms of diagnosing and getting everything done in like one day, or over the course of several months and things like that. So in terms of exposure, it was brilliant. And which is why personally, I feel it's important to have at least a 6-month work experience for the program that you're applying, not just any work experience, but in the field that you want to apply, so that you're also showing the admissions team that you have taken the steps necessary to address your interest. So if you have an interest in a very specific or a niche field, like I think Satvika's field is pretty niche. So things like that, I think a little bit of work experience, or even in my case, because it has a specialization in maternal and child health, I think that experience really adds to your application.
Right. And what was the male representation at work? I mean, I know doctors equally work with OBGYN, you'll have an equal representation of male and women. But what about the allied health? Like you were an allied health.
Yeah. So in this, it was, I would say, I think we were an all women's team, actually. It was just the assistant nurses that some of them were men. So, but otherwise, in terms of the workforce, that is the embryologists and the doctors, we were an all women's team. So, yeah. And I also think, because it has a little also to do with the kind of patients that come, they're from marginalized societies. So I think in terms of comfort also, they also prefer to see, express their problems, or, prefer to see, because it's a sensitive issue, it's reproductive science, it has to do with gynecology. So that level of comfort is there, a little more is there when it's a woman doctor, I would say. Got it.
So you see that in not only for the caregivers, but also from a doctor perspective, they prefer a woman doctor to a man doctor.
Yeah. But this also depends. For example, if it's you and me, we've got that kind of education. We are more open-minded. So, for us, it wouldn't be a factor. But for people from weaker sections of the society, things like, comfort, because it's a taboo for them often talking about these issues. So in those cases, they do prefer, a lady doctor, so that comfort level is there.
It's there. Got it. That's a great insight, especially what you mentioned about the work experience, because I couldn't honestly emphasize that enough. I think for you, within winning a presidential scholarship, the key has been that your work aligns so beautifully to the goals that you created for yourself, right? Your short-term goals are so beautifully aligned to the work that you're doing. Ananya, like you mentioned, you started with a little anecdote for us about your first day in the engineering class with 5:50, right? 5:50 woman-man ratio. What was it like? What was the experience in a class which was entirely male dominated? Was it this whole, this whole thing about when we see it on OTT, it's a lot on OTT than movies, about how the men are super excited because there are 5 girls in their engineering class. So was it that stereotypical experience of saying, okay, we're 5 girls, we better watch our backs? Or was it like, what, the teachers treat us the same, it doesn't really matter?
Well, I think there is a discrimination. I mean, walking in feels like it's a boys' club. You're out of place here, right? The teachers also do treat you differently. I feel like, I mean, they teach the same thing, but when they're answering questions to you versus to a guy, it's a bit different. But otherwise, yeah, I feel like, you feel like you're in a boys' club. You feel like out of place in this, at least initially. In my first year, I also did a couple of coding competitions where I would go for like competitions and like code, and then I would notice that towards the end, I realized that okay, I'm probably the only girl in this room, or like there are so many more guys in the room. So these are one of the things where you feel like does feel out of place, but I feel like you're the representation there, right? And then you inspire the other girls from your class. So in my second year, when I joined student communities in college, I ensured that I joined a women tech makers club that focuses on representation of women in technology and gives them the exposure, right? Because I know what I saw when I first entered class on my first day, and I'm pretty sure a lot of other girls felt the same. So, joining communities, talking about your experiences, helping each other up, all of these things actually, I didn't feel the same in my subsequent years of my engineering as I felt on the first day.
Wow. And Ananya, did somewhere this gender representation play a role in you picking your colleges for your shortlist? Or did you not look at the gender representation at all?
No, I didn't look at the gender representation.
Got it. But there was a sense of being dismissed, if I can put it, or being spoken to differently, or being your expectations from the faculty members at college were a little different because you were a woman?
No, I wouldn't put it that way either. I feel like as a woman, a lot of times we tend to underestimate ourselves and, doubt how much we actually know. That is the major difference between a man and a woman in STEM, because I realized that if I talk with the same amount of confidence and I'm able to put my point forward, like the faculty doesn't really dismiss you. I haven't faced this issue anywhere else.
Got it. Satvika, Tripti, how about the two of you? Did you ever feel a sense of being dismissed, whether in an internship, or Satvika, for you in a research opportunity, or even in class, where you felt like, just because as a woman, my opinion is not being given at that due importance? I mean, Ananya brings on a very important point, that it could just be the conditioning from within ourselves. Forget societal conditioning or biases in society. It could just be our own conditioning of ourselves, where we are not willing to assert ourselves in the way a man would assert ourselves in STEM. So, Satvika, let's start with you. Did you feel that ever, that there was a sense of being dismissed as a woman for your views or for what you brought to the table?
So for me, I think it was quite the opposite because of the nature of the field. Psychology itself is a field that is predominantly, even in India, from what I know, there are more women psychologists than male psychologists. So on the other hand, for me, it felt more like being in a space where I belong, but because the field itself is women dominated. Even in my internship experiences and things like that, the colleagues that I worked with were women. So I didn't really experience an equal gender ratio in that sense, wherein I got to work with a diverse group of people. It was very sort of women focused. I wouldn't say there was any discrimination, but I felt a sense of, why is this field only women? Why are there not more men in the mental health space? And what is it about the field? Is it that emotions and talking about things that are vulnerable, or discussing mental health is something that is a women-centered discussion. Is that what it makes us if there's only women in this field? So there was that sense of questioning, but I didn't, luckily feel discriminated against.
And remind me, what did you go to King's College for? You went there for a summer course. What did you study there?
I studied the interrelationship between the brain and the body. So that was I would say, a more heavily biology focused summer course.
And what was the representation there in that summer course?
I think there it was pretty much equal. Equal, yeah, there was around 50-50.
Got it. Do you know the current gender demarcation of the current program you're going to? Have you looked into it?
So I had an introductory session with my class a few days ago, and there were 8 people. My program is very small. There's only, every year, there's only around 10 applicants who are selected. And this year, there were 8 people who attended, and 7 of us were women, and there was 1 boy. So I think it continues.
Like I said, it's a stagnant problem. And I think, we all constantly say, well, there aren't enough women studying engineering and math and comp-sci. But I am also trying to constantly tell people and talk about the fact that, well, there are women in STEM. We don't recognize them as women in STEM. Mm-hmm. Psychologists, us, STEM focus is social science. It's a science, right? And economists are women, and allied health workers, embryologists, lab technicians, they're all STEM, right? But we don't consider them STEM.
Yeah.
For whatever biases that we may have. I mean, that's another research paper altogether. But yeah, this is really interesting for me to understand. Tripti, how about you? Any biases that you have experienced at work, internships, college? Anytime that you felt dismissed because your views were coming from a woman or what you brought to the table?
So I didn't feel like that throughout college or in any of my internships, but I did feel like that a little bit at my job. So it was in a bank, and so I was also new, right? So there would be some times that I would just not understand a new product that's come into the bank. So I would probably ask 2 more questions, because I've always been that person to completely understand it. So that was not because I was poor at finance. It was just because I was new and I really wanted to understand the product well. So when I did that, after a point, they were like, you know what, forget it, it's fine. Anyway, you won't really understand it. And I was very shocked to hear that, because it was, and I think it stemmed from the fact that, like you always hear, they say that women aren't very great with numbers. And whenever it comes to finance matters also, in general, even in our household and everything, right, it's the men who handle the finances. And every time any financial matter gets a bit complicated, they all huddle up and they leave the women out. So I think that's kind of like that thought process seeped in there also. And so that was one time I faced it. And sometimes I used to think it's probably because I'm the most junior person there. Like there would be some points that I would add to a discussion, but they wouldn't give it too much importance. So I'm not sure if it was because I was just a new person in the job, or it was because I was a girl. I'm not really sure about that, but that's one place where I felt a bit dismissed.
Interesting. So actually, let's do this. Let's brainstorm. Everybody, if in a sentence you can wrap up, what according to you the solution to this? I mean, look, from a recruitment perspective, I wanted to talk about recruitment, but I do understand, like Ria, for example, from where you come, there is a bias in recruitment because they want women. Because like you said, the demographic wants to speak to women caregivers and caretakers and embryologists and lab technicians and things, right? So obviously there is a bias there. Yeah. Ideally, in your case, there shouldn't be a bias, but it is banking. And like you said, again, there's the cultural conditioning that men are better with finance, right? So if a Tripti Agarwal is there with a 3.9 GPA and there's another boy with a 3.9 GPA, they're just assuming he's smarter than her, right? Because that's our cultural. So let's not talk about recruitment. Let's just directly go into solution. Like, what, according to you, is the solution? Ria, where do you think the solution lies?
So coming from a field that is more women dominated, I think, so what I have understood so far, I just have a year of work experience, but I think this is what I see across the healthcare industry, is that the application pool and the entry level jobs, there are a lot of opportunities for women. That's why it's so women dominated. But the minute you go into senior executive positions or like CEO and those kind of bigger positions, it again trickles down to a very skewed ratio. So for example, if you take something like a tech where you already have few women, and then there are, out of that pool, there are lesser women who get into senior executive positions, it's a bad ratio. But when you already have a large pool, like a healthcare thing, and then it trickles down to such a small percentage that goes into senior executive, that shows, it paints a worse picture actually, because now you have a bigger funnel, but it's trickling down to something so narrow, it's so steep. So I think it's important to hire women in a power position. So like in senior executive roles, things like that, you need women, because I think there's also a certain level of understanding that comes when you are a woman hired at that position, because then you take the step forward to ensure that I see more women in my team, or at my level. You get together with other women of similar positions and you're like, we can do this. You can start this for women. So that kind of thing comes up when I think representation is very important at senior levels.
At the senior level. Excellent point. Ananya, what do you think? Sorry, Ria, I didn't mean to cut you.
No, especially in healthcare, because you already have such a big pool.
Batch funnel, like you said. I think very well articulated, Ria. And I think it's a very, very valid point. Ananya, what are your thoughts on the solution to this?
I'd like to go a few decades back. So, and give you a few examples about how women were the backbone of the early programming industry. So during the World War II, there was a bunch of clerical work, like punch programming is what it was called. So a lot of women were recruited, and they slowly learned the power of, the logic behind all this. And so because even building the first computer,
the men were at war.
Exactly. Yeah. So it was the women who were doing the boring clerical work, right? But it was actually that it was them who built the first computer, Ada Lovelace, right? And then Grace Hopper, who came up with the compiler's logic. So there are, and even the maths that was written behind, Neil Armstrong's Touch the Moon was Catherine and Margaret Hamilton, right? So there are a lot of women in STEM in the early 1900s that have made such big breakthroughs, right? And what happens in the 1970s is that there was this whole geek culture, right? Of when right before the tech boom, and everyone's talking about how that's when there was a shift in stereotypes and a lot of prejudice that women are not good at math or science, right? And that's when they slowly got edged out, and the gap between men and women in STEM increased. And then that leads to so there's a deep-rooted stereotype that men are better than women at math and science. And then which also in turn leads to issues like, gender pay gap and underrepresentation, and then there's stereotypes. I think that's the major factor. Like we don't see, and one solution that I think about this is having more media representation. If you think about the top 5, top tech movie or tech show that comes to your mind, let's say Silicon Valley or Social Network or The Big Bang Theory, right? You see a lot of them have male-dominated shows, and only talking from the male perspective. We need to see more. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying that there aren't movies or shows about women in science and tech, but then we need more representation. We need more people talking about things like that, because as a kid growing up, that's what we see. And then we see, okay, I want to be like her on TV, right? Yeah. That's where it begins. So I feel like the solution, which might be very niche, but I feel like we should have more media representation.
Right. Satvika, how about you? What do you think is the solution?
From my experiences, I would say, centered on what I've discussed so far, this whole understanding of what STEM is as a whole is very, very unclear and very far from the reality that the general public perceives. STEM is seen as just physics, chem, bio, math, engineering. Whereas
Yeah.
it's so much more diverse than that. Each of these fields have 100 subspecializations, which are as much scientific as their root broader field, but they go unrecognized because of how niche they are, or how, you know, how super specialized they are. And even in fields which are supporting allied healthcare, I think that STEM should, first of all, either erase the concept of STEM as a whole, which is just putting things in a box, and making that box exclusive to some and non-exclusive to other. So either just abolish that concept of viewing subjects like this, or at least in the criteria for identifying a subject as STEM, maybe look at it from a perspective of scientific inquiry and how the field engages with answering questions about the world around them, and look at it from that sense, and maybe see if try to understand what it means, as opposed to just trying to blankly classify things as a binary, whether they are a STEM subject or not. And I think the way to do that is to have more discussions like this, wherein people from different diverse STEM backgrounds itself can come in and share their experiences, can talk about how their fields incorporated or engaged with these concepts and subjects. And maybe through that, hopefully, the understanding of STEM itself will widen, and people, regardless of their gender, will be able to pursue a field that they are genuinely interested in, and gender should hopefully not be a barrier.
Perfect. I think that's a really good thought to put into action. I mean, if people would really sit down, but you're right, having more sessions and engaging with audiences and helping them get a perspective is definitely a good start. Tripti, how about you? What would be your solution?
So pretty similar to Satvika's. One of the biggest thing is having more of these kind of discussions, because I think a lot of this trickles down to mindset, and not just of the society, but even girls themselves. There's always been this idea that STEM is always more difficult, and it's very easy to use that as an excuse and be like, oh, it's super difficult. And then even growing up, I feel like girls are not pushed to take the more difficult path. It's very easy for them to be like, you're always going to have so many more other responsibilities. Why you're making your life harder? Just do this other thing. Or, anyway, girls aren't really good at that. A lot of it is conditioning and mindset. So having more of these discussions, of course, would be a nice way for younger girls to listen to different perspectives and understand that there have been girls who have been through it, and it's really not that hard. Like, I mean, at the end of the day, everything is difficult. It comes down to the whole science, commerce, and arts. Like, oh, if you get bad marks, just go to arts. You need to have really good marks to go to science. That discrimination of what is more difficult sort of affects the choice of subjects. And also, if we talk about what Ananya mentioned, that, initially was women in that field. And then later, I think in the 70s, she mentioned the men started taking over that role. And I think that happened because they started realizing how maybe effective, interesting, or difficult and complicated those fields were. And it was always like, okay, the men should be a part of that. So if you stop looking at things as some are easy and some are difficult, you won't have that first layer of differentiation. And another thing about the media representation, I think, so there are movies, right, with women scientists as lead roles. And I think we should praise that, but we praise it to an extent that you realize that it's not normal. That, oh my God, okay, it's a woman in a movie, that's so special. And we need to start normalizing that, I think that is also, and that's obviously a very futuristic thing, but that's something I think we should try to aim to achieve, to just normalize, having a woman lead in a movie that's science-based should be normal.
Yes. Should be
this is something that I think about.
I mean, Tripti, to your point, it got me thinking what you said. Every year when I work with applicants, I get applicants asking me questions about the standardized test. And there are a group of people who ask me, should I do the GRE, should I do the GMAT, right? Or should I not do it at all? I have a waiver, or can I apply for a waiver? But there will always be these people who will tell me that I have a mental block, I don't want to do it. And I was just thinking back, last 5 years data in my head. No boy has ever told me I have a mental block against the GRE or the GMAT. I don't want to do it. It's always been girls who've told me, no, I'm not going to do well. For the boys, it's always been like, I don't want to give it. It's too much effort, right? Can I just not do it? But the girls are like, the word mental block is something that I'm doing counseling with every year, sitting them down in front of the screen and talking them through their mental blocks. It's all last 5 years data in my head. It's always been girls. So very interesting insight, Tripti, there. Very interesting that let's just normalize it and not just say something is hard for you versus hard for them. Something's hard, something's easy, whether STEM or non-STEM. And
I think ultimately, whichever field you go into, you have to work hard no matter what. You can't just be like, this is an easier stream. Everything is easy if you just do it at a basic level. If you want to go to a higher level, no matter what, can you give me an example of a stereotypically easy field? There also, at the higher level, you have to work hard. Nothing is easy. That's the point.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And that does actually bring me to, talking a little bit about the application journey, because there were elements of your journeys that were hard. But, each one of you have overcome those obstacles with such aplomb, right? At any given point, either one of you would have, I was like, okay, this one is reaching her level of burnout, or this one is reaching her level of overwhelm. But then I saw you resolve it, right? Whether it was through a discussion that we had or just by yourself, or you zoned in and said, you know what, I'm going to break it up into smaller parts. But there were moments that each one of you, because I've interacted with each one of you individually, I know that there were moments of severe overwhelm that were creeping in, and then you resolved it beautifully, right? Let's start with you, Tripti. What was the toughest part of your application?
So for me, it was the SOP and also applying to universities that I thought I couldn't achieve. So again, it was like a self-confidence thing, but also the SOP was really difficult, especially like fitting it into the word limit. That was really hard.
That was really hard. Satvika, for you?
I think you'll recall from our discussions as well, Tripti. For me, the hardest part was just to get started. It felt, and to keep going as well, but to get started, it was so overwhelming because these are some of the top universities in the world. These are programs that I've worked for so long to want to get into. It's a huge decision, and it can get extremely overwhelming. And with writing my first draft of the SOP, it was like nothing I wrote was enough for me. I just kept sort of re-editing it and completely changing it and just trying to just figure out what works. But it took me a very long time. I think my first SOP, it stretched on for like over a month. Nimisha, who I was working with to help me, format the SOP and all of that, she would just get so anxious as well. So Tripti and Nimisha helped me a lot with talking through it and just, moving on with the process.
I mean, if I give a first draft and last draft to somebody, they would not agree the same person wrote it.
Yeah, that was my point, that understanding that your first draft will never ever, as much as you want it to be perfect, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be what you imagined. It's not going to be what you think will get you into the top university in the world. It'll be something that'll look half finished. It'll look shoddy, and you're just going to wonder what you're doing. But keep going. Work through it. There's going to be so many different renditions of this draft itself before you reach the end, and each version will have some minute change that will take you closer and closer to the end. So I think that would be the most challenging part for me, and my way to go about it.
Ananya, how about you? The toughest part of the application for you?
I think Satvika really put it very well. Even for me, getting started was very hard. Not just, I think it's the overwhelm, and also just putting your goals on paper, because it's harder to just write them down. Okay, I want to do this, I have to do this by then. And also trusting the process. So even
Yes.
during the process, I would feel, I don't know, is this worth it? Am I good enough for it? Right? And believing that it'll work out and you've put in your best in this, right?
Yes. Also,
So that was the
staying, yeah, staying
toughest.
true
Yeah.
to yourself, Ananya, like not
Yeah.
listening to the noise around you, what
Yeah.
people have to say constantly. I think that was another thing that you kind of overcame soon enough, but you did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ria, how about you?
For me, it was the SOP as well. I mean, it's actually the second draft that's the toughest. So you get the first one down thinking, okay, this is what I want to mention. This is what, so in your head, you know everything and you kind of list it down in your first draft. And then it comes back with like 1,000 red marks. I still remember Nimisha ma'am was my kind of supervisor as well. And it came out with like every line, every second line was like, highlighted in red, red, red. And then I had this completely confused face. And I remember I had a conversation with Tripti ma'am and everyone, and you kind of instill that thing that this is how it has to be, these are your strengths and this is how you need to translate it on paper and things like that. So that translation is what took time. So from that second draft to get it to the third draft is where I think I spend most of my time, because I had to almost delete everything that I wrote in the first and change the language completely and rework my personality. I was like a whole new person at the end of the last draft. But yeah,
But still your authentic self. Yeah, you were still authentic in that draft.
Yeah, of course.
It was fabricated.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why this happened. Satvika and Ananya struggled with their first draft. Their story was a lot about, look, I did all of this in college, but their goals were all aspirational, right? Ria, for you and Tripti, the first draft was far easier because we were able to help you understand you're doing this at work and how it directly aligns with your goals. So those realizations came to you much faster,
But industry perspective comes
industry perspective comes in, and you definitely know what you want to eliminate in terms of the skills and in terms of the roles and things like that, right? And very often what happens is, with fresh graduates, when we're working with them, they have a resume which talks about the research and the internships and everything, like Satvika and Anya and all the others who work with us. And sometimes they start feeling like, oh, you know what, my first draft looks like I've just taken my resume into paragraph form, right? So that conflict of, but they told me not to do that, but actually they're asking me to do that. And then to help them understand that, no, it's more about using the realization from the thing that you did in your resume. So that comes easier to people who have work experience, which is why the second, third draft and word limits, Tripti struggled with that. And to a certain point, Satvika, eventually even with your essays, we had to really work on the narrative to cut it short. But that was the key difference. And also the alignment to the program. Ria, for you, that worked beautifully in your favor, right? Yeah. But you didn't start off wanting to apply to this program.
Yeah, no, I didn't. Because actually the program that I got in, that is for public health with a specialization in maternal and child health, this program that I'd applied for, the realization to apply for it came after I joined my work. So before that, I had applied, I gotten into institutes for reproductive science, and that was like core biology. It was core, there was research involved. There was no public health aspect to it. It was just pure science. And then this was before I started my work. So it was right off college. So I knew maybe this is a way forward. And then I started working and I got introduced to the public health sector. I got introduced to the healthcare sector. And then I said, okay, this can be a probable future as well. And in terms of, jobs and things like that, if you're not someone who wants to enter the research field or doesn't have the patience for it and would rather have a job after you're done with your master's, then in that terms as well, I kind of, then switched to public health. But I did apply to colleges for that and got in as well. And then I chose this in the end because of its job prospects and things like that, which, so it came when I started working. It was not something that I had initially thought of when I wanted to apply.
So that college research element became critical for you to be able to have a realization.
And that realization came after I had a sit down with you and kind of spoke that, okay, so I had a list for public health with a specialization in maternal and child health, and I had a separate list for reproductive science. And I had two separate SOPs as well. So, I had to kind of tailor each SOP depending on the specialization. So that bit in the SOP is also pretty important, actually. You kind of have to switch to another. So when you're pursuing just a pure sciences, your goals, your short-term goals, everything has to align to that. And when you're going for something more more job-based, more in the job sector, you need to align your goals accordingly. So I think those things also matter when you're writing your SOP.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great insight, Riya. Tripti, what was your experience with your program selection process?
So initially, I wanted to do a pure economics master's. And I remember, like, that's what I told you also. I was like, I'm looking for a quantitative curriculum, but it has to be economics focused. And then we came up with like a final list. And it's very funny that the universities that I ultimately applied to were quite different, and the programs were different, because through the process of my first SOP, I realized that I really liked the quantitative parts of all of these curriculums way more than the economics part. And then when we did like more research into like my future goals, I just realized that I was not a very research focused person, and that a pure economics program would lead me to a career like that. So that's how I ultimately switched to a more like stats and math based program. So my course selection process was based on interests, but also really understanding the core modules of each program that I'm applying to.
The focus on the core module became critical for you.
Yeah, very, very. And also realizing that my skill set matched with that and my goals matched with that. So it's not just the program name that you look at, but it's really important to look into what modules they cover and what are the electives that they have, what are the core modules that they have. That is what ultimately drove my program selection.
Perfect. Great insight. Satvika, in fact, you had a completely opposite experience. Satvika, you were very clear what you wanted to study. We've had a lot of conversation about how it's very, very competitive. Let's be prepared for a list B and all of that. But you were stuck to your gun, right? How did you zero in on this subject selection, Satvika?
So I think it. So my first interest, I didn't think I would be in. I mean, when I started psychology, I was very clear that I wanted to just do psychology. Neuroscience wasn't even really something that I knew enough about, or even understood, or even thought that that's what my master's would be focusing on. But I had two instances in my college, which one was a summer program with King's College London, where we studied about, like I mentioned earlier, the interrelationship between the brain and the body. So sort of understanding how these different pathways in the brain very actively influence our biological processes that take place in the body. I found it fascinating. I was instantly drawn to it. And when I felt that sort of connection, I wanted to explore it more. So we were offered a module in my college later called Brain and Behavior, which was essentially an introduction to neuroscientific perspectives and just neurobiology. And I was very excited to take that course. And my professor there, I ended up engaging with him, Professor Sham Sudhakar. I ended up talking to him more, and we explored my interest together. And when I had to go for my select a topic for my thesis, I ended up looking at the effect that adverse childhood experiences have on the long-term well-being of individuals, which also focuses on neuroscientific understandings, on how the brain changes through adverse childhood experiences. So what I'm trying to say is that when I sensed an interest in this particular field, I made sure to try and explore it through the different sources and resources that I had accessible to me. And I found my interest only growing in the field. And that's when I started looking for programs that allow me to explore psychology, but also allow me to explore neuroscience. So the program that I will be pursuing, it's called Developmental Neuroscience and Psychopathology. So it's really the perfect blend of these two areas that I'm very interested in. So
Yeah.
So by the time I had to come to applying, I had a general sense of understanding of what I had to do. So how that ended up happening was to sort of explore different things, grab opportunities wherever you can. I understand that they might not always be available, but wherever possible. And if you find that an interest is, you're particularly interested in something, maybe explore that more if you get a chance to read up about it, see how deep this interest truly goes. And yeah, engage with the people around you who have done things like this. Don't be afraid to talk to them. And just sort of expose yourself to the world as much as you can, and that will help you come closer to what you really want to do.
Great advice. That's great advice, Satvika. Ananya, your choice. And I remember when I first started talking to you, I did explore, well, do you want to look at something more niche? Do you want to consider AI, ML? You were like, no, open-ended, I know, but I'm still doing a general computer science master's. What happened there? What was your thought? What was the research? What led you to that confidence in saying, I'm not going to commit to a super specialization just yet?
Well, I guess, so a lot of the master's courses for computer science that I researched had courses in such a way that you could specialize in the second year. Like when you look at a 2 years master's program, the first year is usually where you're figuring out what your which subjects interest you, and then you can specialize and write a thesis on it the next year. And that's how it would go. So I did not want to, like, since I did not have any work experience and I was coming straight from college with basic understanding of a bunch of topics that really interested me, I didn't want to zero down on a very specialized niche course. And I liked how a lot of the programs that I researched about had the option of specializing in the second semester or the third semester, when I have a well understanding of the professors that are working in the field, the opportunities in that field, right? And I liked having that option. I was really drawn to the Cornell program because it has a perfect blend of technology and entrepreneurship. Yeah. And my experience at the entrepreneurship cell in my college, and also my projects in like public interest technology really helped, like really gave me a taste of what it would be like, and I really want to work in like public sector industry. So, and I like how the college has programs that focus on interacting with other companies, other NGOs to solve their problems and issues, and it's built in their curriculum. So I think researching you can be confused at first. Like I was confused at first, if I wanted to go for a broad computer or specialized. But I think researching for the programs that you're interested in, talking to a lot of people really helps.
Got it. So I think my key takeaways from this one question has been spend a lot of time researching your curriculum, right? Find out what are the core modules you'll be studying, forget the name of the program. Work, because when you work, you're able to really solidify what your area of actual interest is. And any opportunity you get, whether within the classroom or outside the classroom, grab it if you think it's your area of interest to see whether it truly sticks and succeeds. Right? Would I have summed it up accurately? All right. I'm going to invite people to just leave questions in the question box there. I'm going to go into one last question. I know we have only 2 minutes on the clock, so I'm going to get the panelists to do 30 seconds quick on their recommendation strategy. And then we'll take, probably one question each panelist. I don't want to keep people away from their Saturday afternoon for too long, especially the panelists who've already been gracious enough to give us an hour. 30 seconds each panelist. Ria, we start with you. Recommendation strategy that worked for you. You're on mute, Ria. You're on mute.
I'm sorry about that. I think receiving LORs from professors that you have worked with, that could be someone, a professor that you've done a project under, so that he or she has observed you carefully, has seen your research methodology, has seen how you go about, how you conduct yourself in a lab or with your project work. And if you have work experience, then definitely one from your supervisor. My supervisor was a very senior gynecologist, so she could pen down, and she observed me for a very long time. I worked very closely with her, so she could really pen down our work experience and how I was in the lab and things like that. So definitely reach out to people whom you've had a close association with and who know you very well. I think that is very important, because it's very easy for anyone to write a very general recommendation, but it should highlight your strengths. It should highlight what you've done, and maybe one particular instance where you've shown a particular skill or something like that. So that said person should be able to say that one instance and things like that. That really helps you put a foot in the door, I would say.
Got it. Ananya, your recommendation strategy that worked for you.
So I wrote to a bunch of professors that have taught me and have worked on projects with them. And I think one thing is, while writing to the faculty, either add in your resume or the project report that you worked on, so it kind of brushes up their memory on, okay, this is the class I taught you and this is the project we worked on, because they probably receive a bunch of emails and they don't reply to a lot of them, and constantly reaching out to them, okay, hey, do you have time to write my recommendation? Do you need any help for it? Because we have to understand that they're also very busy, right? So unless we build a connect, and I had to do this virtually, right? Writing to the faculty, hoping they respond in time. So I think, yeah, keeping in touch with the faculty helps.
The covert operations need to be well strategized.
Yeah.
Satvika, how about you?
Yes, so I agree with everything that's been said so far. To add on to that, I think also looking at what the program that you're applying is about, and trying to find people who you have worked with, who also have some experience in the fields that your future program will be covering. So my program looks at neuroscience and psychopathology mainly. So my two references were written by a professor of neuroscience, a neuroscientist that I had worked with, and a psychiatrist that I had done some other work with. So try to get these areas. So these are people who know what your program is about, who know the field that you're going to be studying, so they can combine their understanding of you and your skills with your competence in that field, from their own experience of that field. So that sort of makes it a very well-rounded LOR.
Got it. So the technical LOR.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The academic one could be any subject, but you're talking specifically about the technical skills.
For both, I think for both, if even the person writing the academic LOR has experience in the program, that the field of the program you're going to be applying to, then they can come. Yeah,
that's a plus, for sure. Tripti, how about you? What was your recommendation strategy that worked for you?
Yeah, so I'm pretty similar to everyone else's. And also one big thing was to understand that it's not important what the position of the person who's writing the letter is. So it's not important to only go to the head of the department or the dean and things like that. It's really important to contact someone who has seen your work and who you're close to. And another thing that worked for me was thinking about what they could write about me and what I couldn't fit in my SOP. So again, like coming to the SOP word limit, there were things that I could talk about. So there were also like projects that I did with the professors that I could mention in the SOP, but I realized because of the word limit, I would leave that part of it for the professors and I would cover everything else in my SOP. So that way, each like document that went into my application had new things for them to read about and it all tied together. So that was something that really worked for me, to really think about what they could write and could I avoid repeating that anywhere else.
Great strategy. So to summarize, reach out to your faculty well in time with documentation of how you work with them. The more recent the semester, the better, but then get them to know that, yes, we have worked with this applicant, this student, so we are willing to give it. Like Ria said, make sure that it's somebody who really knows you well, can give personal examples of supervising you and working with you, whether as an academic or a professional recommendation. Like Satvika said, if it is a technical LOR, make sure that the person can talk about the technical skill sets that you have that align with the program that you're applying to. And Tripti brought in a very, very valid point that this person must be somebody who, can talk about the things that you're doing, which are beyond what is already in the SOP and what's already in the resume. Right. So I think if you just put some of these strategies together, you'll have a really, really good idea about what your recommendation strategy should look like as a future applicant. We've run 5 minutes past, and I honestly have to ask you this one question. So we're going to leave Q&A for a personal approach, if you all don't mind. Can I request the attendees to reach out to any of the panelists that you wish to speak to through their LinkedIn profile? I'm sure none of you will mind it. Some of you, in fact, even been nice enough to already connect with other people as well. So go ahead and send Satvika, Ria, Ananya, Tripti a LinkedIn message if they have a question, and they're happy to respond. I do want to take the last 5 minutes to talk about two things. The one thing that worked for all these 4 applicants was the fact that they started early. This is just a slide for a screenshot. Go ahead and take a screenshot, and then you can study it and understand where you are in this timeline cycle. What I definitely want to ask before I let you girls go was, what was the one thing, and Satvika, we'll start with you. We're ending this panel discussion with this one final piece of thought from you. What was the one thing, Satvika, you wish you knew from the very start?
So as a child, I was very sort of just overwhelmed or afraid to sort of explore the different fields that were possible for me to have taken. So, for example, after 10th, there were so many choices that I was just extremely overwhelmed, and I ended up taking commerce, even though that's not even nowhere close to what I'm doing today. So I would say I ended up taking commerce because my entire family has a finance background, and I thought that I'll just fit in. It'll be in my genes somewhere, and I'll just figure it out. I wish that I knew that it's okay to break out of the mold. It's okay to try something completely different. And it's okay for there to be a lot of uncertainty at that stage, at an early stage of 14, 15, when you're trying to figure out what you want to do after 10th, for example, that there will be a lot of uncertainty. It's not the end of the world. You can figure it out. Allow yourself to sit with that uncertainty, to explore options, to select what draws you in the most. And what you end up taking then might not be what you do 10 years from then, but that's okay. You'll figure it out.
Yeah. Great. Because the rest of the life is too long, right? Can't plan. Ananya, what was the one thing you wish you knew from the start?
I think for me, it is don't doubt yourself, because as a person, like I think Satvika articulated very well, I'm also an overthinker, and I constantly think, should I do a master's degree now? A bunch of questions that just keep gnawing at your brain, and then you're stuck at one point. It's like paralysis by analysis of all the options that you have, all the choices that you can make. And so I think it's to just start, because the only way out is through. So you have to, even though it's going to be a tough process, you have to make it through, and don't doubt yourself through the journey. I think this is like beginning of application process, and even thinking, okay, should I go for a master's or not? This is what I wish I started early, and I wasn't overthinking.
Perfect. And I think these are also messages that you're giving your younger selves, right? I mean, I sense that there is a blend of that happening. Okay, for my younger self, don't overthink, and be confident, and be okay. Things can change and life can change, but you do be true to who you are today. Great messages. Tripti, how about you? One thing you wish you knew from the start.
Also, mine again is very similar to Ananya's. It's not to doubt yourself, and also to be confident and not be afraid of just like applying to universities that I think are out of my reach, because that was one of the biggest barriers for me. And something I wish I knew from the start was that a lot of these university applications are like very strategic. Like if you strategize well, I know I've done the work during my undergrad. I've done projects, I've worked, I have some work experience. It's just about how I'm able to portray everything I've done and align it with what they're offering. And can I be an ideal candidate for them? It's all about just, number one, like believing in yourself and understanding that there's a strategy that's going to get you through.
Got it. Riya, we come to you for the final piece of wisdom.
I think very, very similar to Tripti, just believe in yourself, and like nothing is too far out of your reach, honestly, because when I started out and I was kind of shortlisting my colleges, and you suggested a number of colleges that were like my dream institutions that I wouldn't even think of, maybe a year ago, that, okay, I can give this a chance, purely because I was like, nay, I don't think this will happen, it's out of my reach. Even though I knew that, okay, I have this kind of work experience, but just that little boost of confidence that you need. And then in the end, it all works out, I guess. You just have to believe in yourself, have that bit of confidence. It's a mental game in the first few months, and then it's just a waiting game after that. So, so just give it time, believe in yourself. And at the most, you're going to get a reject. It's fine. I mean, you'll have 10 other acceptances or even whatever, even one other to replace the reject. So it's not a big deal. It's fine. You can just, always, and like Tripti said, I'm sorry, like Satvika said, be open, I would say. Like that would be my biggest advice. Don't close off, be open to opportunities, keep an eye out for them, and definitely grab one if it's one relating to your field of interest.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. And, thank you each and every one of you for being here. But, Ria, just for your point, I'm going to end this on an anecdotal note where I remember my first session with you and you're sharing with me all this work that you're doing, right? And I started calling you Dr. Ria because your work is so intense, medical. And I think after 1 hour, you were like, sorry to cut you off, but I'm not a doctor. And I was like, really? With all that you do, you are not a medical doctor. That was for me an eye-opener because the work was so technically strong. But I think the experience that the four of you have shared today, not only from the point of being successful applicants in this journey to the rest of your life ahead, but also as women, right, has definitely brought something to the table, more than just the discussion and the fact that, we are willing to share and talk and think and ideate about how we can make this a more solution-oriented approach versus just discussing the problem. I think what each one of you have brought to the table is that, look, these things happen. There are gender biases or there are recruitment biases, and maybe men are facing some other biases, right? I mean, it's not equal. Biases are not just for us minority, right? They're probably facing it in some other place. And the idea is to be mentally strong about facing these biases and facing them head on, and then being more solution oriented versus saying, well, you know what, this defines me. Neither of you have told me how it became a setback in your life. Neither of you allowed it to become a setback. You were aware, you faced it, you thought about it, you observed it, you thought about it, but nobody internalized it. And I think that is the beauty of this panel today, that, each one of us is not going to allow the implicit biases or the conditioning of the society around us to dictate to us who we are going to be in the future. And that is my big takeaway, that I'm speaking to four extremely strong and sorted women. And I truly, truly thank you for your time today. Satvika, all the very best to you. Definitely stay in touch. Ria, I know you're going to stay in touch. You are somebody that I'm definitely going to be in touch with for very long. Tripti, Ananya, I can't wait to meet you guys when I'm in the US next, whether on the East Coast or the West Coast. But thank you so much. It's truly been a pleasure speaking to each one of you today. And on this note, I'm going to end the webinar. But again, I'm requesting people. I know I couldn't take any questions today. I'm really, really apologetic about it. I've already gone 15 minutes over time. Please go ahead and put it in the LinkedIn. Reach out to them on LinkedIn, and I'm sure they'll be happy to respond to you. Thank you so much, panel. It's been a great afternoon today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much.